Welcome, everybody, back to the Open Concept podcast, where we are breaking down unnecessary walls and barriers that stand in the way of greatness. Very special guest today, Dr. Ken Keis, father, friend, entrepreneur, master guru, if you will, of personality. It's just such an honor to have you here. I know you quite well. And for the listeners that don't know who Dr. Ken Keis is, why don't you give us a bit of a backstory on, because you weren't really always involved in this. You have sort of an interesting story, and I would love if you could share that with our listeners.
Well, thanks, Brandon, for having me on. I appreciate that. That's great. And friend, well, this is good. I'm glad that we're friends. I appreciate that. And of course, for those people listening, Brandon's been through our certification and we've kind of connected through the years over that with our content. So, now I've been in the professional development field. I think it's my 36th year. So so I just started. Yes, I know I look very young for those of you people that are watching the video part of this. But yeah, like you said, I didn't start there. I actually grew up on a dairy farm and came back from college and couldn't work with my dad. And so those of you that are business owners and trying to work with family, I understand what that dynamic was. Left that, went into serving in the agricultural place, which was my space. I got a diploma in nutrition and genetics, and I ended up being in agricultural sales. I was the number one salesperson, and I progressed from there into my own sales training company. Way back in 1989, I was the number one sales performer before I transitioned over. And then it was this progression where I got involved with the company that I now own, Consulting Resource Group, and we do business in 30 countries, 13 different languages, a million users, somewhere along the way. Where I progressed from just doing sales into leadership and really developing the whole person. And so there's been this journey and transition from there. And so it's one of those unique situations. I might have a PhD, but I love getting my hands dirty. I mean, I grew up on a dairy farm. I had my own dairy farm for a while as well. So when we were connecting through you, Brandon, and all the people in I'll call it the blue collar space, I just love that space because I need to do it. I'm sitting on the computer all day. I need to get outside, do something in the yard, go over to my daughter's place, help out with chopping wood, whatever it is, just to be active. So, I just appreciate the entrepreneurs that are listening and watching and just their space. And it's just really my journey is to be able to honor people wherever they're at. I mean, if you're a janitor or a CEO of a billion-dollar company, I don't care. You're all equal in terms of your contribution.
Yeah, that's amazing. And from what I understand, it wasn't like the dairy farming. This goes back in your family.
Well, it's now
How many
5 generations with my
Five
nephew.
generations.
And my grandfather bought the farm in 1945. And the one that they're on, they had started before that. And then unfortunately, he passed away just 3 years later. So then my dad took over when he was 15 years of age. So there was a lot of history from it. But one of the things that happened, and when we think about, one of my passions around leadership, how did I get into this? I knew when I was even like 12, 13, 14, 15, I wanted to speak and communicate and influence people in a positive way. Even back then at 16, 17, 18, I was being asked to be the MC of many community events already then. And I enjoyed doing that. And so now I get paid to speak, but just this whole idea of these generational businesses. And one of the reasons I left the farm is my dad didn't really, and he's still alive today as we do this podcast at 92, is just the lack of communications to be able to understand where you're going, what's your vision, what you're doing. We're Eastern European descent. So listen, you do what I say. We're not really going to talk about it. And everything was ending up being in a conflict. And so that's not really where progress occurs. So now I have this passion. So, okay, how do I communicate? Who am I? What's important to me? The other one is my grade 9 teacher said I would not amount to anything. And I write this in my book, The Quest for Purpose, which we will give away as a free gift at the end of this show. So you stay tuned for how you can get that. And the reason they said that is this is prior to computers, Brandon, where I could not read or write. So mild dyslexia, couldn't spell. In my grade 9 teacher said, English teacher said, you wouldn't amount to anything. And now I've authored 4 million words of content. So my encouragement to the people watching this, a lot of times there's people around us, is one of my famous sayings, is that every single person around you, especially with social media now, has an opinion, but very few people have wisdom. And so everybody's going to chime in what you should do, what you can do, the direction you're going to go in. I could never imagine, even in my 20s, that I would actually be a successful and best-selling author. Like, no way you could convince me of that. So we have to go on this personal journey of really determining what is best for me. There's some of you that are listening, you're in a business right now that's really not a fit for you. There's other people that you've thought about a business, but you have not taken that step to move into it because of fear or hesitancy, or the people around you have not been encouraging. I mean, that's what you're trying to do, Brandon, is to say, okay, all of us have, I believe everybody has a purpose in life, in that it's our job to seek it out. It's not something that, okay, it just shows up. Ken, you're going to be this influential person on leadership and personality and assessments all around the world. No way I would have sort of envisioned that 35 years ago. But I knew that I wanted to be this positive influence. So I had to go on this journey, which I did. So the Quest for Purpose book is the journey I went through in 1989 with a coach before coaches were big. About, I know I was supposed to serve people, but what about to who and about what? And so my purpose in life is to help others to live, lead, and work on purpose. And your highest contribution, my highest contribution is when I'm leaning into my calling, my assignment, my purpose, and I have energy about what I'm doing. Life is not necessarily easy to start with, but boy, add something where I'm doing something where I'm miserable, then it's just pathetic. So no wonder I lose, I'll call it engagement, is because I'm not doing what I like, I'm not doing what I enjoy, or I'm in a role of responsibility that's not a fit, which of course is the work that you did with us around understanding self and others, and most people aren't doing that work for
Totally.
whatever reason.
Let me ask you, what is the difference between opinion and wisdom? You mentioned that you had said everybody seems to have an opinion, but not everybody has wisdom. And I love that, because I think that it's super true. But I'd be curious for you to dive a little bit deeper into. I mean, everybody has an opinion, but it doesn't doesn't mean that it correlates necessarily to wisdom.
Well, with the social media platforms, everybody can chime into something, right? And recently in world events, I was getting this big debates online with individuals, which I don't normally do, but the ignorance was so high because what happens is people. I'll give you an example. This is maybe more extreme. You have individuals that share an opinion about how you should parent, Brandon, but
Oh
they've
yeah,
never been a
I,
parent.
I,
They're not
my
a
wife
parent.
and I totally, like, we have
And so there's somebody who says, well, I'm going to give you an opinion about how to have a successful marriage, but you've had 3 divorces. So these are where people have opinions, but they have no experience or proof of success in that space, or an understanding of all the deeper things that are going on. So when we think about wisdom, and there's another thing that they use with those people that are my age now, sage, right? You have experience that has a proven track record. And the other side is you also can have experience about what not to do. So I can bring wisdom to say, hey, listen, I tried that, Brendan, but it failed. It sucked. It didn't go very well. And so I'm sharing you wisdom of what didn't work as well as what does work. And so this is where there's so much noise, and there are many people. I have to be careful. There's some people in the world say, there's lots of couch potatoes that have all these opinions, but really they don't have insights. They don't have the intelligence or the deeper knowledge of all the complexities that are going on with the different areas. So even from a leadership point of view, or how to hire people point of view, or how to lead people, they just don't have that information. So the reality is the majority of people get into a leadership role, but they never are mentored or modeled or develop the skills to do it successfully. They maybe, or even from a parenting point of view, where you grew up in a dysfunctional home And that's been modeled. So now you have an opinion about how it's supposed to be done, but it's not a good opinion. It's not wisdom. It's not something that's based on something. So usually when we think about wisdom, it is where a person has a proven track record and has experience in that space that they are making comments about, or at least they've done the research on it. And you obviously can't go to the mainstream media for research anymore. That's just totally biased
Yeah,
with it.
yeah,
Then you have to look at go deeper and try to find out, what's really, really going on in these areas here. And so that's why a lot of times there's so much noise that you just got to shut that off, because stop it now. Don't share. If I wanted your opinion, I would have asked for it. Or there's another statement that goes out there, and this is very true because there's lots of, I'll call it people who are haters in the online world, is that if I wanted your opinion, I would have asked for it, or your opinion of me is none of my business. There's all these sort of insights.
yeah.
So, I'm going to have this opinion of you, but you've never been in a leadership. You never taught leadership. This is not what works. Listen, I'm not really interested in your opinion. And that's not an arrogance. It's really around, and those of you as leaders too, you need to kind of protect yourself. So a lot of times people say, Ken, you should do this in your business. Well, if that's not my vision, if that's not aligned with my values, then thank you for your opinion, but I'm not taking it in. I'm not bringing it in. So that's where, Brandon, you've been part of, BTA and other groups where you have like-minded individuals with like-minded values. And it's not you're becoming insular, you are becoming directive with people that are going to help you go in the direction you want to go, not somebody else's. What if somebody came and says, your vision for your CRG should be this? Well, now it's your vision, it's not mine. My purpose, my passion, my direction. If you want to have a general contracting business and it's your general contracting business and you want to work on luxury homes versus doing spec homes at the low end of the market, you are making the decision. Well, no, you should go into the luxury ones, not the spec, or you should go into spec and not in the luxury. Well, it's what you want to do. And so this is part, one of my friends, a large developer, do huge, 50, 60, $100 million apartment buildings. Well, most people don't want to do it. Nobody wants to be exposed to $100 million project. So, and just all the complexities of building, a 300 unit building. I just want to build a single house, with or apartment or a duplex or something like that.
You
So
know,
this is what we're talking about.
yeah, what's interesting? I mean, so many follow-up questions. Yeah, for you there. So, but what I think is interesting is one of the things that we really want to do, and what I want to do as a business owner, is make sure that our staff and our employees and our clients, they win.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We want to make sure that they are able to hit their goals and make sure that the vision that we cast encompasses their vision and it's big enough that it gives them space to grow. But when I say I want somebody to win, I think about what comes to me is what I would consider winning. But what I understand needs to happen is I need to understand what they consider a win, because my win is going to be very, very different than somebody else's.
Absolutely. And so there's two tracks on this. We always talk about self-awareness, and we're thinking about, okay, how do people win and how people become successful, and how do I live a life on purpose, or how do I lead on purpose? All these kinds of questions. Well, the number one sort of area to start is I need to develop my self-awareness. And I quote this, you're familiar with this statement, and it was my colleague who wrote the book Insights, at New York Times bestseller, Dr. Tasha. It said, what percentage of people believe that they know themselves? In other words, they're self-aware. So my opinion of self and how I perceive myself is equal to your opinion and how you see me. And in her research, it was like 95% of people believed that they knew themselves, and that my opinion of self and how your opinion of me are congruent or equal. And then she had her students go out and interview, okay, what does Brandon really think of Ken? And this is what Ken thinks Brandon thinks of him. And that was only congruent 10% of the time. So 85% of people are delusional. So they don't know that they don't know. So first of all, they're showing up in a completely different way than they perceive themselves. Perception is not aligned. The other side is, the Gallup work over the last 20 years is that I think the best has been like 80%, but 80 to 90% of people dislike what they do from mildly irritate to loathe. Why would we have, in a world where we have so many opportunities, 80 or 90% of people not liking what they're doing? And the reason is they don't know who they are. They don't know what their personality is. They don't know what their values are. They don't know what their interests, their gifts, their talents are. And this requires work. And what really shocks me, Brandon, most people go out to a restaurant, and nowadays with the cost of things, go have a pizza and a beer and spend $100, or go to the keg and have a steak and spend $200, and a glass of wine, which is now $20, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's nuts.
But they won't spend $45 on an assessment for themselves. Oh, it's too expensive. Compared to what? Your
Yeah.
whole life, you're going in the wrong direction. You're miserable. You're not enjoying yourself. You're not contributing at the highest level, and you won't invest 50, 100, 200, $500 into yourself to be able to get clear. That's the greatest investment, the best investment you could make, is because it's going to be in perpetuity. It's going to be forever. Once I've gotten this clarity, I know who I am. And here's what the other thing is: 70% of people don't know what their personality is. And there's a lot of personality assessments. Ours is number one in the world now, as rated by participants, the personal style indicator. And the reason why is because it's so user friendly, helps you to act on it. You've been through the training around it. You've used it with your employees.
Yeah,
Is
just
that
just
I need
just
to
to
know
believe
who I
it.
am. Now, if I'm a parent, every single person on the planet, this is my bias, needs to understand what their personal style is, for all purposes, for my personal engagement, for my choices in my career, choices with friends, how my relationships work with my family, with my friends, with my customers, in sales, client, everything. And so that is just a huge, huge gap that people would have. Then what I can do, when I know that I know who I am, I can make intentional decisions, because my ability to be successful in life is equally the ability to say no as well as yes. So all of a sudden I get this promotion. I remember we had the sole source contract to do all the soft skills training for Chrysler. And so this was a great contract for us, multiple seven figures. And I was in this workshop doing the personal style indicator with this service manager. And the service manager says, "Oh, if he completes the personal style indicator, and he says, 'Now I know why I hate customers.'" So, well, hang on. You're the service manager, you have service advisors, or I hate people, basically.
Yeah.
And he says, "You hate people, you have techs that work for you, you have service advisors work for you, the parts department, and you have all your clients." Well, what he was is he was a mechanic that had been promoted into misery. So he was a task oriented individual, now in a management position. And because they were going to pay him more money, and he was not going to be able to have to pull wrenches anymore, or whatever it was he was doing to pull a transmission or something like that, he was now promoted to be a service manager, but he was miserable. And so, yes, we get attracted to these shiny objects, but they're the wrong objects. They're the ones that are burning us. And in other words, eroding our soul, because we're not aligned with who I am. So I believe every single person, now I have a spiritual bent, but every single person is born with an assignment, a calling, a purpose. So we need to uncover what that is. It's not right, it's not wrong, it just is. And so then we also have this personal style that if I can get in a role of responsibility that is mostly playing to my strengths. Most people watching or listening to this know about the strengths movement, meaning I want to be able to play to my strengths. It doesn't mean that I can use my excuses or my weaknesses as an excuse, but I want to have the majority of my role in my life playing into those strengths, because that's my highest level of contribution, my highest level of energy, my highest level of just fulfillment for me in peace in life. And so this is where most people don't do the work. And that's why, 35 years later, there's still millions, if not billions, of people that need to be able to do this.
I I think it's incredibly interesting. One of the things that you hear people say the most is, just be yourself. Just be authentic. And I tend to agree with that. I think that that's a really great way to go through life. I think though, and you can tell me your wisdom on this, uh, why I think people struggle with actually understanding who they are and what their authentic side looks like. They may feel that they are acting authentic, or they may think that they are being authentic, but
Mm.
are they in fact being the best version of themselves and the most realist version of themselves? Or are they just in a state where they think that they really feel that way, but it's not actually true, and it's not coming through. And then you find things that they are getting burnt out because they thought they were maybe a really creative person, or that they were a really funny person, so they started
Mm.
putting in a lot of comedy, and then that kind of got dry into maybe some of their content. And then that starts to eat up inside. If I find, if you aren't being the best version of yourself, or the highest form of authenticity. But where do is there a big difference there? And how do people go from that uh state of just really feeling like they're living in that authentic state? Because deep down inside they may feel that they are really being authentic, but in a lot of cases I think they're not, or they're trying to be
Oh,
somebody that they're
so
not,
true, so true.
without
Now,
them even realizing it.
two responses to that. First of all, and I'm sorry for the listeners and those watching. I don't have the exact source, but there's a new study around authenticity that the highest level and the most positive energy that we bring into any kind of interaction with our life and others is when we are being authentic. So, why do we dislike most politicians? Because we know and we can see through the narcissism and just the fact that they're not being authentic. So, the highest level of positive energy is when we are being authentic. Then, what occurs when you think about, well, why aren't people being authentic? Well, part of this is teaching, part of this is insecurity, part of this is I don't know. There's this societal pressure to be somebody different, to act like somebody else. As a person who has kids and now grandkids, and especially in this world of social media, which I didn't grow up with. But even when I was in high school, I was picked on. I was because I was the farmer kid in the city, and so all of a sudden you're trying to fit in, and you have all those pressure. But now in social media, the self-worth levels of especially teenage girls is in the tank because of all these false projected images that they're pretending to be somebody. And then the other one is you have helicopter parents that are over managing kids' lives, or feedback from people again who have an opinion but don't have wisdom. I remember when I was going to leave my sales job to start my own sales training company. And here's my dad. I'm almost 30 now. No, so I was number one sales rep, had a car, had lunch, had an expense account, all covered. Dad said, "Why would you want to leave that to start your own training company?" So even when I'm 30, I'm getting pressure from my family to not make this decision where I've now been in it for 35 years. So a lot of times people are going to get advice or feedback from the wrong sources. Again, this goes back to, are you getting opinions or are you getting wisdom? Stop going and getting opinions. If I was mentioning it earlier, but it's a prime example. Let's say I'm going through a personal struggle in my marriage, and then I go to talk to my divorced buddy, or my wife goes to talk to her divorced girlfriend. That's the last person you want to go to. You want to go to somebody who has a marriage that's rocking, that's absolutely stellar. You want to go to them and say, "What are you doing to make your marriage work?" You should never be going to somebody where they had a failed marriage and they were divorced. They don't have any evidence that they have wisdom to bring to the table. So authenticity is lacking because everybody says, "I need to be this other person." And you get into these social media swirls. And of course, they are meant to be addictive, and I can get drawn in it too. And then all of a sudden, you just have this projection, I want to be liked. And this desire to be liked is then all of a sudden, I'm not being real. And so if I'm authentic, then really even from a health perspective, from a stress, from a cortisol point of view, I'm going to be more at peace. Because if I'm trying to project somebody else, that's why when politicians who are pathological liars and narcissists, why does it make your whole body crawl? Like it makes you yucky. Sorry for the sophisticated word, but just because you can see through it, you feel through it. It is an energy. You know, you can walk in a room, and we talked about this when you came to certification, Brandon. We can walk in a room, we don't know anybody there, and if there's a major conflict between a couple of parties in the room, you feel it. Well, how do you feel that? How do you feel tension? Well, tension is an energy that is dispersed. Positivity is an energy that's dispersed. Authenticity is an energy that's dispersed. MIT did a study where they put an individual in one room and a glass of water in another. Now they came and they saw the glass of water, they moved them to another room, and then they had to focus on that glass of water and they had them think negative thoughts. They were actually able to change the molecular makeup of that water through that negativity. So you've been around somebody who is toxic. Now, here's this other side. This is a total sidebar, total
Yeah.
ADHD moment.
Love the side. Love
There
the
was a new study of an individual. Let's say I have a team of 6 people, and you add a toxic person into that team. One toxic person in a team of 6 will reduce the productivity of everybody else by at least 40%. Holy smoke. So when you think about this authenticity, if I'm not being authentic, I'm really maybe being toxic to myself. I'm being toxic to other people. And then so the flip side is if I'm a positive person, then I can increase people by about 10 to 20%. So authenticity is very, very important in pretending to be somebody else and be miserable. Now, there's another side where authenticity, selfishness could be construed as being authentic. And that's a different thing. There's people who are self-centered rather than self-honoring. So there is a difference there. Self-centered, it's all about me. I'm better than you. This is the difference between confidence and arrogance. Arrogance is I want to kind of project that I just want to try, be on better than you, rather than I am okay in my own skin. I feel confident in my abilities to what I'm going to do, and what you're doing is independent of that. Versus where arrogant people, I want to put you down, so I'm first in this list here. And again, that's why a lot of politicians are not appreciated.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing insight, world class. I have is there a follow-up question to that? Is there a time in which being inauthentic can serve a greater good? Is there a time in which being inauthentic can positively serve you uh, as a listener, as a human being, or is that something that's just crazy? And here's where I'm coming from. All right, you're the guy or the girl that's there and is, usually maybe you're quite negative, you're quite quiet, you're very much an introvert, but should the time show up, you really step up and showcase what it is that you're made of. You make a large statement, you really drive motivation towards that team. Now, I don't know, is that being inauthentic, or was that just maybe the authentic part of you that's really trying to get out? But that's kind of like where I'm wondering is there a time where being inauthentic is a good thing in your thoughts?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think there's more. I reframe it sometimes as there's honest and then there's stupid honest. And so I said, how do I look? So you're going out for a date and with your significant other, and they say, well, how do I look? And do you like this dress, or do you like this outfit, or whatever? And it looks horrible. Well, it's fine, dear. So
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
that's
not really being authentic. I'm just really not being problematic. The other side is there's also timing, right? So there's what they call inappropriate authenticity. And then there's some people who do self-sharing and it's way too much. Have you ever met somebody for the first time? And man, their whole life story is like in the line at the coffee shop. And just, that was authentic, but it was inappropriate. It
right.
wasn't. So if you have some feedback for a team member and they ask, well, how am I doing in yada yada, but you have some negative or constructive feedback for that person. It's not that you're not being authentic, it's just the timing is not right now.
Yeah.
So
That's a good point.
you redirect that, and they said, well, we can go deeper into that privately if you want. And so we said, so you redirect it, and it's not that you're not being authentic. It's just that it is not to the best at this time to fully disclose what you're thinking or feeling, because that would do more damage than good. So in many cases, you're being mature, you're being professional, you're being diplomatic. Rather, so is that in many ways that is where a person develops their interpersonal skills. Everybody talks about EQ or EI, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
emotional intelligence or emotional quotient. So am I actually be conscious, awake, and aware at this moment that if I was to actually reveal everything I'm thinking about you, this would be destructive to the relationship? Well, that's really not authenticity or lack of. That's just being wise again, right? Because there's being stupid honest. Or, you go, and not that I'm saying this. So somebody goes to the border and they said, well, have you ever done drugs? And in high school, when you were 13, you tried it once. So yeah, I was. Okay, so you're refused. Well, that's stupid honest. You
Yeah.
just say, not that I recall. No, no, I just say no. So there's this authenticity where sometimes it's just being ridiculous because the whatever the question is. So that's where, and then the other thing that comes up, and Brandon, we talked about this in training, where we teach this step, and this is one of the hardest things for me, even as a person who's taught this for 30 years, and probably one of the top 10 experts in the world on personality, which is, I'm saying that just crazy, but where we're trying to manage our own emotions. Everybody's offended, right? And when you get in offense, then you actually have a false sort of authenticity. Managing, I'm doing just finishing a 1 year coaching project with a manager, and so we were working with her around her leadership style and what she discovered through the feedback process we do. We believe in a thing called feed forward, not feedback. Feedback is historical behavior. Feed forward is what do I want? What do I need from you? So in this journey, her self-modulation of her emotions was contributing to the destruction of the team. You
Yeah.
want your sales team to produce, but then you get negative. So there is a posture of, am I optimistic or am I pessimistic? So which is more authentic? Well, the reality is sales were down 20%, but the optimistic point of view is, how can we turn this around? So what would you call authenticity? You would call it posturing. You would also call it, based on the book Learned Optimism. Optimism is a proven track record or success approach that where pessimism is not. Pessimism does not get you the results that you want, even though you might appear to be more realistic or more authentic, because success people look to what's possible, not what is. So
So
with them in this year's coaching, we got her to understand that managing the relationship, her relationships, managing her emotions, not being triggered is the word we use, and that all of a sudden it's really transformed the whole team. And it's taken time as we've gone through it. It's been a year-long coaching project. It's been transformational for them, and it's amazing when you take people through it. And she's just so thankful now about just paying attention to what she was doing and how the difference, and how people are coming and says, thank you for working with her. She's just a new leader, a new manager. It's amazing. Now, people need to be ready and willing to do it. So there's a lot of leaders who don't want to get the feedback, don't want to get an understanding of what's next. So they need to do the work. But in this case, she was, and it depicted a transformational story. And this authenticity question, which is a very good one, is how do I modulate myself so I'm not triggering and saying what I'm really feeling right now, which maybe has nothing to do with reality. It just has to do with how I feel. So I want to deal with facts, not feelings.
I love that. Moving forward, not backwards. What was the phrase that
Oh, it's
you
called
learned?
Feed Forward. So
Feed forward.
I was just very fortunate to have some time with Marshall Goldsmith, who's just recently retired. Marshall Goldsmith was the number one executive coach in the world. He's written the New York Times bestseller called Triggers. And so I was an invite only event in New York with him and 50 probably top coaches in the world. And he has developed this whole coaching process around called stakeholder feedback. So and that's like our leadership skills 360 tool. You get feedback about how everybody experiences you.
Really great tool.
You put that together, and then you actually go to the leader and says, Brandon, this is how Ken thinks and feels, or this is how the team feels about you. It's all confidential, pardon me. And then we move, says, well, what could that person do differently that would improve your relationship? So that's the feed forward. The other thing that's interesting, this is totally off topic, but a lot of times people get entrenched what they think of you, especially family members. What Brandon to your family is what you were 10 years ago. Is we actually teach managers to educate people around them about the changes they've implemented. So in other words, let's say at the end of this management meeting, this sales meeting, this manager says, guys, one of the things I'm working on is how to listen better and not interrupt your thoughts. Did you notice that that's what I did in this meeting? Oh, okay. So your previous opinion of me that I would interrupt and I would be toxic. I am now rewiring your perception of me by drawing attention to you of the new behavior. It's interesting because if I don't do that, if I don't draw the attention, you're not going to unlock from the previous perception of me, even though I demonstrated new behavior. I am having to educate you on that change. So that's the great process that's we take people through.
But let's go back kind of to the beginning of the conversation real quick here. You mentioned you were the number one sales leader in the sales organization for a number of years. You're out there, you're absolutely crushing it. You're about to make this switch into leadership training. What was it, do you think that, what do you think was it? Let me rephrase that. What do you think it was that drove you to become that number one salesman in that position? Was it values that you held deep? Was it just simply a drive and grit? And can anybody do that? Does everybody have that inside of them? Or some people just simply not able to sell? Or are some people just simply not able to lead a team? Is there little something of that was inside of you that somebody else may not have because you are your own unique thumbprint?
Mm.
Right?
Well, I think the answer is yes and no, and that's a legal response. Because it goes, it
You're
depends.
taking the political stance
Well, no,
on.
I'm gonna answer it, and here's why. The sales has all kinds of different kinds of sales. Am I a telemarketer that I would sit at a desk and do outbound calls? I would suck at that. It just wouldn't even work for me. Mine was, I was in agricultural sales. I was visiting other farmers. I was a farmer, so I had identity with them. They knew me. It was the community where I grew up in. So I was a relationship guy, but also my personality style or my personal style is extroverted in our model. Now, extroversion in our model is described differently. It's people that influence the environment. In other words, I'm not afraid to take risks. It has nothing to do with people. Extroversion in our model is a separate, people and tasks is a separate measure. Introverts are where they're more careful, more cautious, and engaging the environment with challenging behavior or new behavior or risk behavior is more difficult for them biologically. Now, if I'm in sales and customers come to me and I'm in an environment, then maybe if I'm more introverted in our model, then that will work for me. Now, the other one is interests, gifts, and talents are separate measures, Brandon. So I grew up in a dairy farm. I was a agricultural sales rep. We were not a transactional sales. Once I got a customer, it was somebody I was selling to every month.
Yeah.
So it was reoccurring. And I built relationships over a long time. My retention rate was 95%. I built slowly, but I never lost anybody because I was a relationship guy, but I was also persistent. So, and I was also patient. What would happen is that if I was to grow my sales, I actually had to take you away from another account or another supplier because it was sort of like gasoline. Okay, so you go to Chevron. and I want you to come to Petrocan. I'm going to take you away from Chevron because you're going to fill up at mine here. So I needed to realize that they had built a long-term relationship with somebody else. They needed to trust me. Going in there, guns blazing, being an idiot, trying to be demanding isn't going to work. I would just go there and get to meet them, build trust, build relationships, be persistent. And then what happens, sometimes people would make a mistake on the other end, and then they would call me, says, listen, we're ready to try you. We're ready to do a test with you. We're ready to investigate. So that could be for you, Brandon, where you have a developer and says, you know what, we've had this other builder, but they kind of screwed up last time. We would like you to do one of our next houses. Would you be open to that? So they're testing you, but you've been there all along with them. So when we think about sales, it has to be what's interest. Now, I could never sell computers because it's not an interest of mine. I'm not a techie guy. It's not the area that I'm in. Now, I'm into data because I'm a nutritionist by training. So we were doing all of that work and helping them do it. And then when we think about leadership, there's all kinds of different personalities are successful in leadership. Every leader has different strengths and weaknesses. So there are some things I can do as a leader that's easier than others, and there's some things that are more difficult. That's why when we teach building an organization and leadership, you need to have people that complement you, not ours the same as you. A lot of times we hire people that are just like us, when in fact you need to hire somebody who's opposite of you, who is quite irritating because they're different than you, that be able to have that team or that organization be successful. The challenge is most people don't know how to do it. So when Jim Collins wrote the book Good to Great, hire the right people, the right bus, and the right thing, right seat, doing the right thing, he said that's great, but he didn't give them a system to do it. That's our system. So you have the job style, you understand what's the position, what's the person, what's the compatibility, what's the fit, and then I'd go and I do the work around interest, gifts, and talents. So as I said, I knew when I was 16 that I liked and enjoyed speaking. I then had to go on this journey of, okay, what was my topic? What am I going to speak about to who? And just allow myself years, not weeks, not months, to really refine that and continue to develop that. Like even for me at my point as a grandfather now about, that's one of the most important things. And you're a dad now. And you, of course, we've talked about that, being a parent, being a grandfather, just how delightful, that's not the right word, just awesome that is,
Yeah.
and how important it is. And so even for me as a person who really has a lot of spirituality in my face, questions of eternity, at my age, and just leaning into people's lives so that they can have a fulfilled life and make some of these sort of eternal decisions. That's a priority for me. That probably was not true when I was 20. I know it wasn't. So, but so we have different stages of life where we just kind of fine tune it a little bit. We just move it. It's still around developing people, but with this foundational underpinning, which is more important to me now at my stage of life than it was maybe 40 years ago. So that was so it's developed. It hasn't changed, but it's sort of progressed. It's refined. It's more fine-tuned at this stage of my life.
Do values change over time? I'm talking core values. And I mean, when I say core values, internal core values, but also in business, a lot of companies, for instance, they will put out, an operating procedure and they'll say, hey, this is the company's mission. These are our core values. Maybe they've plastered it all over their office walls. So this is what we live, breathe, and die by. These are our values. Do those core values change over time? And do those values as a company? And so I'm saying independently as an individual, if you're a very driven person, or maybe your one of your top values is challenge or spirituality, does that core value change over time? And on the other side, as a business, when you are establishing your core values, should that be something that you relook at every year, 3 years, 5 years? Does that change?
So yes and yes. So your question is actually a little more complex than just do or don't. I believe that there are different kinds of values. So there are internal motivator values, which we have the values preference indicator. You recently used that with your team. It's a sister tool to the personal style.
Yeah.
We believe that those internal motivating values are very consistent throughout our lifetime. They don't really change a lot. And it's an anchor point. And these are values that have needs and fears, and that I need those values to be present to feel fulfilled, okay, and to be honored in my presence. They're not right, they're not wrong. So you and I probably have challenge on our values list. Well, that means that if I'm in a role, one of my fears is being bored. I need to have challenge. I need just to feel alive. Okay. So that's not going to change throughout my lifetime in most things, even sports. So I've taken up, my wife's been playing tennis 4 times a week for 10 years. Now I'm playing tennis. Now I need challenge. I need to be better. I'm upset that my wife still beats me in tennis, even though I've only been playing for 2 years, right? So that's the challenge side that's there. Then there's contextual values. So things like wellness or family or where I'm volunteering. And so these are sort of external ones where, based on the time of my life, these are things that are important to me. That is another layer or a different set of values, right? Now, you were talking about business. Well, we also have the team values indicator, which is an organizational or team values. And so these are what we'll call operational values. Okay, integrity, innovation, excellence, customer service. So we can look at those on an annual basis. Now, when you're the owner of the company, as you are, then those values really come from you, not from the team per se. Now, if I'm in a large organization, let's say I'm in a multi-billion-dollar national company, international company, then what's the values of my team? How do we want to operate? So that assessment's interesting. Says, what are my top values? And there was a list that Forbes did not that long ago, is most top companies and organizations have a set of core values which are behaviorally based, which means this is how we conduct ourselves. Now, you talked about companies posting those values. If you post those values and you don't live them, they're actually worse than not having any at all, because you're not congruent anymore. You say that you value and respect, but you're disrespectful. Well, now that's a lack of congruency, that you say one thing, but you do something else. That is one of the number one sins as a poor leader, is to say one thing and do something different. So as a result of that, now all of a sudden you have values of a business, which are different than personal. So I have these internal values, which have stayed pretty consistent throughout our lifetime, contextual values, that different things that change. So maybe health was never a value of mine, and all of a sudden I had a heart attack. All of a sudden, boom, I better lose that 50 pounds. I better start being active as part of that process. Then I have the team values. Okay, you know what? I want to put integrity. And then you see how people conduct themselves. That's where I remember going, I was doing an on-site visit in a Chrysler dealership with a sales rep. He said integrity is one of his top values. And then I watched him misrepresent a used car. And I said, you said your value was integrity, but you didn't tell the customer all the details of the used car. And he said, yeah, but if I did, my used car manager would have fired me. So his number one value was job security. It wasn't integrity. So we do this challenge. Are your values for sale? Are they your values? So that's another one where a lot of times values can change because they actually never knew what their real values were, because they inherited them from somebody else. They were sort of put upon by a family member. I remember doing a workshop, and I mentioned this story, Brandon, when you came to training. There's a 22-year-old in the back of the workshop, and in our values assessment, we ask people to rank their top 7 values, and we say, are they met or not? And he had ranked all his top 7 values as a minus, meaning not being met. His life was not reflective of that. I says, why is that? He says, my whole life I've lived what my family and my parents want, not what I want. And so there's also cultural pressures. I remember working in a business, and this was a business where it was owned from people from Asia. And the son, who was the firstborn, was expected to take over the business. He hated the business. He hated it. And I said, why are you doing this? He said, well, I'm expected in my family and my tradition as part of my culture to take over this business. And so he was doing that. 2 years later, his dad walks in to him and says, oh, by the way, I sold the business yesterday and you no longer have a job. So his whole life, this guy was 42 years old. He was dedicated to the business. And then culturally, his dad, without any knowledge whatsoever to his son, who was the general manager, sold the business out from under him and just said, you're gone. So that whole 20 years that he worked at this business, he was frustrated. He was not aligned, but he was loyal to his family culture. Now, I'm not here to judge that culture, but that fulfillment for that individual, he wanted to be in the arts. He wanted to be a chef, and he was in a car dealership. So this stuff happens. Same thing for me. I mean, I love the farm. That was one of the questions I had. I said, well, how did you get disconnected from, the third generation of a dairy farm? Well, I got up one morning on my dairy farm. I actually tell the story in my book, The Quest for Purpose, which we'll give everybody the link here in a second
Yeah.
to get the free book. I got up one morning and it's 5:30. The sun is coming up, and I asked myself this simple question, which everybody can do today in your current situation. If I am doing this exact thing 20 years from now, would that be okay? And I said, absolutely not. If I was waking up and I had my herd, and my herd was a great herd, and it was in the top 20% in the country, and if I was still there, still doing that, would that be? I said, no. So that was the beginning of the end of that journey. I said, okay, it was not wrong. I was familiar with it. I was capable. I was trained in that area, but it wasn't my passion. Now, so we don't forget, and you're going to put it in the show notes, but we're going to give away our book, The Quest for Purpose, in an e-version so people can engage that. Here's what's really shocking, Brandon. Here we're on a podcast. I'm going to give away a free gift for a book that's normally $30 for free, and most people won't opt in to go get the download. Why is that?
Really am going to encourage that everybody goes and download.
So here's the URL. It's hidden, and then it's Ken Keis, KenKeis.com/vision, VISION. So it's a hidden URL. If you go in there and you click on that, then you'll be able to get a free download of the book, The Quest for Purpose. And if you do the work, all the questions that we've been asking or you've been asking about yourself, clarity is there if you just lean into it, such as I did way back in 1989, or as you did, Brandon, with us when coming to our certification and helping you with understanding personality and values and leadership skills and all these different things.
Yeah, the weekend spent with you and the team was incredibly eye-opening. It unlocked a lot of understanding of myself and of others that I had no idea was about, or that was even in there. And so thank you for that. I think that it was the book was excellent. Sorry, the book is excellent. The courses we continue to use on a regular basis. We just opened up the values indicator again for our team about a week ago, and thought that was a really, really incredible exercise.
You're welcome. And the one thing that was positive about that, Brandon, is that you were wanting to grow. And that's the key. You have to want to be able to learn and grow. And that's what contributed to your great experience. So we'll take the credit for setting it up, but you take the credit for engaging it.
I really, really appreciate that. Few more questions if you still got some time for us today. I was wondering, I have to ask you this because I have and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I have a friend, and that person was not being as honest in their life as they could have. And I didn't really know anything about their life, what was going on, but they were physically ill, right? We started seeing signs of stress and skin issues and all sorts of stuff. And I knew that there was some dishonesty in their life. And when we went through this values indicator, one of their number one value was honesty. Now, do you think that is a sign of when somebody's going through the exercises and they go through the values, do people tend to value things that they crave and maybe they're not getting? Would that be inauthentic? Or would that simply be a sign of no, in fact, really, their value is honesty, but the side effect of not living an honest life or living in that value, whether that may be challenge or drive or spirituality or any of the 70 odd values that are in here, would that be a sign that they are not living in that value and that in fact they really crave that? Um, I wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, the way that our values assessment works, you have the window shopping where you have just the list of the values, and then you go through quote unquote the matrix, right?
Yeah.
Where every value is compared to every other value 5 times. So you make 300 decisions in less than 30 minutes. So it's really the cream rising to the top. It's your own opinion of self. So if the value wasn't important, you wouldn't have made it important. And because you're segmenting it with all these different choices, with 300 sort of decisions, then we believe that the majority of these values on the top are what you described yourself to be most important to you. So when you think about in authenticity, pardon me, just stuttering there, is there's a lot of work, and this is kind of going on the edge. It's not something that CRG does specifically, but I have been a participant of it. There's two concepts called emotional freedom technique and emotion code. These are where we have traumatic events in life that actually get stuck at the cellular level. You know, where there are some people, and this is, and I've worked in some with some very high level traumatic groups, and I can't go into the details because it's just too confidential. But these are individuals that had events and things, situations that occur to them that is now 3 generations later, and they are still stuck with it. And this is what we were talking about earlier, is they're focusing on what was, not what could be. So when you have traumatic events or negativity, or you're not being authentic, it actually erodes your immunity system. So you can actually have trauma trapped at the cellular level. You know, the Biology of Belief was a book that was written and that really talked about this as well. And so I actually have an emotion code coach.
Hmm.
So we do probably every 2 months for the last 5 years, we'll do a session, and we can actually, it's interesting, and I'm not asking you to believe this. I'm going to ask you to do your own work. It's worked for me for a decade. And in fact, even longer. One of my friends who was MC at our wedding, he's now passed from cancer, but he did the emotional freedom technique, which is more commonly known as tapping, when I was going through a traumatic event many, many years ago. So I think it was 2010. So we're 15 years later. And what I tell in my book, The Quest for Purpose, is around a traumatic event that occurred to me where my girlfriend was murdered by somebody that I knew. And I just sort of went in denial about that. It was 1982, so I was 21, 2, 3, whatever it was at that time. So in here it is, 2010. I'm going through this emotional freedom technique with my friend over this event that had happened 20 years earlier, and I'm drenched in sweat, just
Oof.
absolutely drenched of releasing all these toxic emotions. So when you think about your friend, is input and conditions contribute to that. Now, as a nutritionist, we also have a toxic environment for our input. That's a whole nother show. We don't have time to go into about what we eat, how we eat, exercise, and our environment is, what are we putting into our head? What are the social media we're doing? How are we eating? Processed foods are killing us. As a person who grew up on a dairy farm, whole natural foods without toxins. I used to work for Monsanto and sell Roundup, and everybody said it would not, which is glyphosate, would not affect us. Now it's in every single cereal. It's a carcinogenic. So your friend's illness could have multiple choices, multiple areas. And we believe in a concept called functional medicine. And we have an assessment called a stress indicator and health planner, and a course called Dying to Live. So that's where they need to go to get started to talk about their wellness. And then from a trauma point of view, go online, look up emotional freedom technique or emotion code, which is Dr. Gary's work. And those are areas that you can look at to be able to release these toxic things. Now, one more point I was mentioning is we can actually be free of some of these toxic emotions, but you could have a very negative interaction, let's say with a client, Brendan, and you can actually absorb their negative energy or their trauma, and it becomes a hitchhiker in your body, and you have to kind of purge yourself of it.
I
So
feel that. I've yeah.
that's why
Absolutely.
I do these coaching sessions and invest in my coach every couple of months just to make sure that I don't have stuff that I have where even I got angry. And then I saw this is a new anger. This is a new offense that I decided to kind of embed into my system. And Patty said, well, listen, this isn't really about quantum physics. And a lot of people don't really get into this area where we just think about how is it that I can sit in one room and change the molecular structure of water in the next room? Because really, is energy doesn't really have this time space thing. And our emotions are like that. And so how can I manage that? So there's the real practical stuff on personality. I need to understand that we're biologically wired that way, our values and all those things. And then there's all these other components. And that's why CRG is one of the top companies in the world, because we believe in developing the whole person. It's not just personality, then it's wellness, then it's values, then it's learning style, then it's self-worth. We finished our self-worth and mental health course just recently and just say, okay, what are the input pieces there? And so it's this constant work. If I'm building a house, I need a lot of trades. I'm not just a carpenter. What about the plumber? What about electrician? What about the drywaller? What about the concrete guy? So if I'm building, so think about your profession, which you're great at. You have all these players that contribute to this home. Well, that's our lives. It isn't any single supplier. It's not the general contractor. What about the window guy? What about the flooring person? I mean, what about the appliance guy? Our life is like that. Let's think about our life like our house, all the different components and the general contractor you are, in that all these contribute to the finished product, which is us, our personhood, our life. I want to look at all of these. Now, you can't look at it all at once. It takes a while to build a house, unless you're on one of these shows and you have 1,500 people there.
Move that bus.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, you've been on TV with HGTV and some of this stuff.
Yeah, we've done a few
behind the scenes. Guess what? It took a little longer than was perceived in the show. There was lots of things you had to do to plan to be able to get that thing done that day. So I'm just saying, hey, it's a lifelong journey. I'm still not there. I've been in this for 35 years and just kind of getting started. And it's just fun. And, why is doing these podcasts? Why do I enjoy this? I've done 500 shows probably. Why do I enjoy it as much now as it did there? Because this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So hopefully it comes across that I'm still enjoying this, I'm still passionate about it.
It is very clear that you are incredibly enthusiastic about what you do. You have an energy about you that is just radiating and full throttle. You can talk about a million different things because you can feel it. You can feel that passion that you have still burning inside you after all of these years, because you are.
Thank you. And it's a privilege to serve. I mean, don't. I just encourage people, never get full of yourself. People just hate arrogance. I mean, and you don't get anywhere with it. Yes, be confident and lean into your own expertise and own your space, and don't let people put you down. But at the same time, don't put other people down. Be honoring, be respectful. Now, if somebody's a real jerk, then get them out of your life, right? We know the research is that your life reflects your 5 closest relationships. So if you have people that are dragging you down, it's not that you're better than them. You are different than them. You're going on a different path. If they want to stay on the couch, fine. You are welcome to. I'm not judging you, but that's not where I'm staying. I'm going to be around people that are going to pull me up, that are way ahead of me. I'm networking with a group right now, and this one person that's part of this group just sold his company for $500 million. So I'm just in a cursory sort of friendship with people 3 degrees away from him. So I'm being intentional, not to be manipulative, just say, listen, I want to learn from this person. I want to understand, how did you do this where you had almost no money? You were down to your last $10,000, and all of a sudden you grew in 10 years a company to $500 million and sold it for that. So I want to be around somebody like that, because that's wisdom. I don't want to learn from somebody else who went bankrupt 3 times on how to build a business. I want to around somebody who just did that. So, okay, what did you do? Now, I will take what fits for me, but I want to learn from that person. And that's what you're trying to do on this podcast, to bring wisdom and insights in examples from yourself and guests of your experience that helps and assists the listener to better their life or their business or whatever the case might be, or all the above?
So many people ask the wrong people for advice. So many people will go and they will ask their parents about what they think they should do with their life. It's like, well, if you ask your parents what you should do with your life, you'll probably end up living a life similar to your parents, because that's really what they know and what they feel is best, simply because that's the experience that they've had. And I find that as there's this awkward stage, and I don't really know how to define it, but if you are an individual and you are really looking to grow and you are starting to notice these values and starting to live within them, and you want to become exceptionally better at what you're doing, or you want to become more and more successful and you want to make more money, at some point there's going to be the friends that you spent time with for most of your life, or a lot of your life, that played an integral part of who you are now. And there's a group of people that you want to hang out with, but there's sort of this middle ground, this kind of weird area where you're growing, you're figuring stuff out. You're not really hanging out with the friends that you were hanging out with before, because you're not really interested in those things anymore. So those interactions become further and further away. You're not really kind of hanging out with the people that you necessarily want to hang out with, because you're kind of in this middle ground of figuring stuff out. And I think that that middle ground too is a place where a lot of people end up really discovering themselves, and discovering what truly matters. And that's really where that journey for most people, I think, is the most impactful, and where people really start defining what their future is going to look like, and defining and figuring out
I would
exactly what
agree
they
that
want.
most of this doesn't happen by accident. My favorite word, which I started before, which is around being intentional. So, you're not going to have your fitness program just by accident, your wellness program by accident, how you eat by accident, your business by accident. Is that the most successful people have intentionality. They have some kind of plan. Now you can change the plan. You can adjust the plan. You can adjust intentionality. Say, okay, I've learned that this isn't working as well as this, and if I change it, I adjust it. Well, that's part of the flow. That's just being in the zone to say, okay, I need to. This is my assumption. That assumption didn't work. Now I'm going to adjust that. That's where I'm going to go. And you're talking about as people transition. One of my mentors that I hired way back when I first got in this industry in the '90s was Alan Weiss. Now, I like Alan. He's intense. Oh, and so he's in his 70s now, but he's still a wise sage. There's some things I strongly disagree with him, but he's written 63 books, so he's been ahead of the game. He said, if I'm growing, I'm firing, he says, 5 to 15% of my customers every year. He says, because I've outgrown them. Now, he says, I don't abandon them. I pass them on to somebody else who can serve them, but I've outgrown them. So, when I started in this industry, it was like $500 a day. Then it was 1,000. Now I'm $10 or $15,000 a day for my consulting or training or speaking. Wow. They say, there are some clients who can't afford that anymore. Or if I'm doing my coaching packages, I charge more than most of the coaches. Why? That's my experience level. But when I started, that's not where I was. So to grow, I actually had to let go. So that's where you're talking about is that if I want to really grow, some of these people that I grew up with, and again, it's not a judgment towards them, but they're just not growing with you. It's not their direction. You're still friends, but they're not that inner core, which is assisting Brandon to go to the next level, to be where he needs to be. So again, I think this is all common sense, but a lot of times not common practice.
Is We talked on a previous episode the effects of AI, and how that is going to play a part on disrupting different industries. And this is a sort of an indirect question, is the digital age that we live in right now. We're talking Zoom calls, we're talking Slack channels, we're talking Teams meetings, we're talking
Mm.
digital avatars. Is there a sense that values, core values may be lost as we spend more time? Maybe it wasn't something that we were born with, but as we spend more time in that digital space, do we get do we get disrupted with that? Is that something that I don't know. Is it good for us? Can we
Oh man, now
expand?
now you got a whole nother show, Brandon. You open a
Oh,
can of
we
worms
gotta
there.
come back. Okay, all right. Well,
So first of all, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm probably 2.5 on the AI knowledge and use, and aware, awake. There's both sides of that story of what it's going to do now that there are some new platforms out there that are learning so fast that in 24 hours they've doubled their knowledge. That's how fast some of these new AI platforms are growing. That's like phenomenal. So when
yeah,
we
it's
think
incredible.
about the Terminator, and then they become self-aware. So there's that side, and there's some ethical things that come into play. As a content creator, I'm using AI as my assistant on steroids, using all the research capabilities, refining stuff, doing in 20 seconds that might take me 20 hours.
Yeah,
So I'm still directing it. And I was trying to use AI to be sort of do some final stuff. It's not there yet for me in the way that I use it. Maybe I'm not doing the prompts as well. So I think AI becomes this contributor. Now, there's a real debate. There are some factories in China that are dark. That means there's no people in them anymore making cars. Like it's 100% AI. They don't even have lights on anymore because they don't need it. Okay, well, that's going to be disruptive to a certain amount of things. I had one of the first computer feeders in my dairy farm. Now there's robotic milkers. I think there was always going to be a human element working with animals, but AI then does a lot of the grunt work. There's AI on the fields now in agriculture where they're using AI to identify weeds and they're using lasers instead of chemicals to remove that. So there's all these improvements, but on the other hand is I believe that values are even going to be more important because we're going to be challenged with ethical questions, directions, and are those directions congruent with who I am? And I'm going to suggest that the personal value set becomes even more important in this move. Now, not to date myself, but when I got in this industry, and I think I said this earlier,
don't
I
date
got in this
yourself. Don't date
industry.
yourself, Ken.
I got in this industry before there was email. I mean, and so now you talk about the progression. So I've always been in this role of helping people through seminars and development. But if I didn't adjust to this online world, and our certification was in person, then it went to virtual. Now it's an online offering where somebody can go 24/7 for a year to take the certification with Zoom calls and Zoom support. That's an adjustment to approach. So the same thing for you as an individual. Are you willing to use AI? If I'm a builder, am I using an app for people to kind of check in and if for their workflow? For on site? Am I using online tools for estimates? All these things that occur. Am I digitizing and using technology to serve me rather than be a burden? I just couldn't imagine, being without technology and what Zoom did or others platforms did to be able to create this business in 1994, 95. I was the senior consultant for Chrysler Canada developing another a global program with one other individuals. I flew to Detroit every week for a year from Vancouver. So I left on Sunday night at 4 o'clock and I came back on Friday at 3 o'clock, stayed home for 36 hours and did it again for a year because we didn't have email and we were developing the program together in concert with some people that had the old Macintosh computer to be able to develop the handouts.
That's an
That
awkward
is how
stage
far we've
between.
come. Now, I had a lot of business class points, but my kids were young, almost resulted in my divorce and separation because I was never home. I was just never like I was away for 300 days a year for 6 years. So I would never do that again, but I'm still in the same industry, but I progressed in how I'm doing it. Think about your trade. What did laser levels do for you versus what you chalk
Yeah,
lines you used to have to do? And like these are just little things when we think about how's technology come. But I got a laser level, I was able to do the whole house, and I'd be able to set the counters for the whole thing for as I install them. What? Just if you go back 30 years ago to say that that was even possible. So the other one is, yes, maybe AI can create it, but there's still human beings need to consume the content. If I'm going to be, there's a lot of trades yeah, maybe you might be able to use AI to build a concrete home. But what about all the other stuff that you need to be able to do to be able to set this up? So I think it's going to be a contributor. It remains to be seen about just the impact on humanity and all things. And we'll just be what do you call it? An observer of all these things out there.
I need you to come back because we have a lot of stuff that we need to cover. Nutrition, exercise. We can go
Leadership
deeper
skills.
on
We didn't
some
even get into
AI.
that.
We need, yeah, for sure. So we'll definitely do all that. And I do want to talk to you about some leadership skills. I should have asked you, do you have more time? Because I can go for quite a while here, but let me know. Do you have another time for another few questions? I know you're a busy
Sure,
guy.
sure. Are you going to split this into two shows? Are you?
No, I don't want to split it into two shows, but
Oh, okay.
I have a few more questions I
Okay.
have to ask
Okay.
you, and then I gotta you back to me. As an entrepreneur, is there something that if you're a results driven, hungry entrepreneur, is there, and you're a business owner, you have a team, is are you going to have a part of your personality that is going to just drive other people on your team nuts? Are there things that are going to are there blind spots that you as a leader, or if you're in a certain personality trait, are there blind spots that you're going to have that you need to really be aware of when you're communicating with others? And if so, how do people identify those blind spots? You as a leader, how do you identify those blind spots?
So well, you got multiple layers of questions in there. So first of all, the answer is yes, but the answer is yes in a different way, meaning every person has a different leadership style. And every leadership style has strengths and every leadership style has challenges or weaknesses, whatever you want to call it. So the irritations are going to be different. So I remember one BTA member who very driven, very what we call behavioral action kind of profile. So driven goals, task, and their assistant was going to quit on them. Says, "I'm done with you." And the reason is that he would not give her enough time. He wasn't giving her enough details. And using the personal style indicator, he understood that he was impatient with her. She needed more information to do her job. He was not being respectful or not coming across that way because he was just so abrupt.
Hmm.
When he learned about that, and she was very valuable to his company. And so his behavior is going to have cause her to quit. So when they learned about that, and I said, you need to go in the office, you need to sit down, close the door, and shut up and listen to what she needs from you, and be patient with that rather than just sticking your head in and then going out again. And then you can also communicate to her about what you need from her and that you're understanding. She says, you saved my business by understanding the differences. Now, there's a flip side, Brendan, where there are some leaders who are not as outgoing. And so let's say you have somebody, a toxic person on your team that is contributing to discord in a group, a crew, or whatever, and you're not dealing with it. In other words, you don't like conflict, you don't like challenging it. You didn't, so you now have the sin of omission. So you're the nice person, but you're not saying anything. Well, now you've eroded your credibility with everybody else in the team because of what you didn't do versus what you did. So so first of all, I need to understand my leadership style. Number two, I need to understand my leadership team or my team. What's their style? And every style has these different strengths and weaknesses. And being a student of personality or personal style is what you're talking about. I mean, conscious, awake, and aware of how I show up, what I prefer, what are my strengths, what are my team strengths. The other one is, am I going to promote people into misery or am I going to promote them into their strengths? And if I don't know what that is from a personal style point of view, I'm going to make some errors. And a lot of times I need to hire somebody who's opposite of me, who I am going to irritate, who is going to irritate me to be able to build my business because I need to fill that gap. And that's where this, our systems, the job style compatibility, the personal style indicator is invaluable to intentionally building people's teams, including helping your team members to say no. So Ken, I'm going to make you a supervisor of this team. So no, I don't want to do that. Well, Ken, but you're so good. Example, I can think of a retail outlet, 6,000 employees. This individual was the number one cosmetic counter person. For 3 years, they try to promote her to be supervisor. She says, I don't want to do it. I love serving my customers. I know the product, and mostly women would wait for this person to serve them because she was so good. But she didn't want to lead others. Like, leave it alone. This upwardly mobile, in a lot of cases, is a false narrative that our society puts out there. Is promotion isn't always going up. Promotion is developing myself in the space that is perfect for me. So this is where a lot of times, if I'm owning my space, if I'm in the right space, I'll give an example. So I work with ministries, and there was this guy that was, quote unquote, the senior leader of a church, senior pastor, they call it. He said it was the most miserable 3 years of his whole life because everybody said, that's what you're supposed to be. He said, no, I'm an executive. In other words, the office manager, the executive director, the person behind the scenes. And so even in that environment, a religious kind of environment, he was promoted to misery. And he says, when I quit and went back to being the executive pastor, which is the operations manager, I was doing what I was supposed to do. So this is true all around the world in all kinds of situations. Now, what was the second question? Because you had something else around leadership that I already forget as I was sitting around that.
Yeah. What was my question? It was a good one. So we had talked about, are there certain traits that leaders might have that are going to drive their team absolutely bananas? My second question to that was, are there blind spots that certain personalities have that they need to be aware of when they're working with people? And how do they identify those blind spots so that they're not, blatantly but unintentionally, walking through people or being rude or not being helpful, or not asking you, just because you didn't ask somebody about their weekend and how that was, doesn't mean that you don't like that person. It was just meant that you were highly focused on what you were doing, and so that interpersonal side of you wasn't really at play there, even though you're maybe not a rude person. But these blind spots that you may have, how can you become more and more aware of some of those blind spots so that you have just a better ability to communicate better
Okay,
with people?
so
And
again, deep questions, Brandon. You're just really pushing it. We're going to have to do like a 7-hour workshop to answer all the questions.
We're gonna have to do a 3-day workshop.
And hey, we have those online. So the reality is that, as I said before, every style has related issues that are irritants. And it also depends the kind of business, what kind of leadership that you're needing or wanting. If I am a Navy SEAL and I'm in a conflict combatant zone, or I'm running a counseling center, obviously a different kind of leadership style is going to be needed in the environment that you're talking about. The only way to really know how people perceive you is that you need to ask for the feedback. And I know we're going back years ago when you came to our certification, and in the second night, we play a game called Know Me. And in that game, and what it facilitates is the ability to give and also to receive feedback. So a lot of times leaders they're very good at giving it, but they're not good at receiving it. If I want to grow, first of all, I need to know what the real condition is. And that's why I'm hired as a coach to do stakeholder feedback or do a leadership 360 where there's confidential feedback. And by the way, personality is one thing, but another one is skill. So personality is my natural predisposition in terms of I want to act on my character or preferences for, being outgoing or people or not. But skills a whole different scenario, meaning, do I understand the 60 leadership skills that we talk about, from self-management, interpersonal, coaching, organizational development, team, OD? Those are whole different levels. So there's some people that are very nice, but they're incompetent. So they're a really, really, really nice idiot. So they're nice, but they don't know what they're doing. So they don't irritate you from a personal style point of view, but they irritate you from a competency point of view. Those are two different things. So when we think about the stakeholder feedback, the reason we interview 8 to 13 people is we want to have a broad feedback. And I interview people usually 30 to 40 minutes about What are they doing well? What are they not? If I was to coach Brandon and I was to give him 2 coaching things that would make him more effective, what would it be? And then when we do the stakeholder feedback process with our clients, they have to sit there, and when I share, this is how people perceive you, you have to say thank you. You can't debate it. You can't argue. Oh, I know I'm not like that. I listen. So no. You're going to just say thank you. So when we played that game, when you came to training, being able to receive feedback is a skill. And if I can't receive feedback, then I really haven't earned the right to give feedback. And so being vulnerable is not easy for any of us, because I might get some feedback that is not complimentary. So, and if you recall in training, one of the reasons that people were so open to do it, we created a safe, supported environment. So I want to give feedback that's behaviorally based, not judgment, right? So the challenge is most times when people get feedback or give feedback, they don't even know how to give it appropriately. They get judgmental. You know what, Brandon, you're an idiot. Well, that's judgmental. Versus, Brandon, do you know that when you're in the meetings, is that when somebody starts to share their thoughts, you interrupt their thoughts. Okay, so that's a behavior. I'm not I'm not saying you're an idiot. I'm just saying that when you do that, it shuts down another person's opinion. And when you ask for ideas in the next meeting, nobody wants to share. Okay, I get that. So how people give and receive feedback is even a skill set that most people have not learned to appropriately do. And even from a leadership point of view, they believe that sharing what the policies are is an agreement to the policy. Well, they don't know that that's not true. So if I say, Brendan, do you know that we start at 8:30? And you say yes. Okay. Well, I believe that you've agreed to come here at 8:30. No, you haven't. You've just said you know it. You have not
It's
agreed to
true.
come
Yeah,
at 8:30.
there hasn't been an agreement.
So there's not an agreement. So a lot of times these things are just missed. And leaders, if they're really going to know what's going on, they need to track it. So again, example with this client is I've checked in with the different individuals. How is this person doing? What could they do? So we're doing it over time. In other words, if somebody's not feeling well, you take their temperature, a couple times a day just to see, are they getting better? Well, am I checking the temperature? That's why we teach people to give feedback about my progress, or to have a conversation about, this is what I'm doing differently. Did you notice that? And it seems, well, why would you draw attention to it? Because people don't change their perceptions easily. And that's where I'm actually helping to manage the narrative so people pay attention to the behavioral change. Even if I'm a leader. So let's say, Brendan, you have not been the most positive person on the team, and you're willing to work with me, and now you're being a Mimo positive. One of the things I might facilitate as a leader is in a team meeting, said, I just want to go around the room and note, can you people speak to how Brandon's being more positive on the work sites?
Hmm.
So I'm drawing to get them to notice that you have changed. Because a lot of times that we goes back to where we're talking about our perceptions aren't changing unless I sort of draw attention to you. And if you don't ask for feedback or do a 360, there's no way to know. There's just no way to know. And you can't. It's kind of, can I guess how much gas is in my gas tank if I don't have a gauge? So everything in life we do measurement,
You need that
except
feedback
for
loop.
leadership or for persons. That's why we're in the assessment business and have 14 different assessments, all these online courses. Because if I don't benchmark, I can't know. Why do you have a measuring tape? Why do you have like a bucket for how much in the mixture when you're doing whatever it is, when you're mixing mud or whatever it is? Why do you have those measurements? Because you need that to know where you're at. So why would we run a team with no measurement? Why would we try to interact with people with no measurement, no feedback? No, well, this is part of why it's broken. Is you're just it's the wild, wild west. I'm just guessing. I have no idea. Now, from a non-judgmental point of view, people are only doing the best that they can at that time. I left the farm because my dad didn't know how to have a communication. Well, my dad's dad died when he was 15. His mom was very critical. He never learned how to communicate, never learned how to build communications. And how he managed the trauma was to withdraw and not say
Mhm.
anything. So the only time I ever heard from my dad is when I screwed up. He never affirmed anything positive. So my self-worth as a high school kid, I sucked. It was terrible because of the environment. It took me years to sort of move through past that because I was always looking about I was never good enough and just the affirmation. So you have this trauma from certain people. So one of the things in our personality development factors model is we can know what our personality is, we can know our values, we can know our self-worth, we can know our wellness, but I could have trauma that triggers me that is totally independent of that. So I have some kind of background, some kind of event that occurs that triggers it. And so I got to deal with that. And that's where I do the emotion code stuff. I want to get rid of anything that's triggering me so I still have a memory, but I don't have the trauma or the trigger that creates an emotional response for me. Think about people that have road rage. Where does that come from? I've had that before. I haven't had for years, but I was younger. I said, guy cuts me off. I don't know him. I've never met him before. And all of a sudden I got a vehicle and now I have a weapon. Like, where
Yeah.
does that come from? So is that we have these triggers that set us off. So we need to manage self. And that was what we were doing with this other client, is helping her to manage those triggers. She says, I take a breath and it's so much better. My marriage is better. Relationship with my kids are better. Relationship with all my staff are better. Relationship with my customers are better because I'm managing self and you held me to account around it.
And I'm gonna tell you a story that just happened. So I don't get out to play golf all that much because my priorities are my business, my family, and my physical fitness. And so to get out on a golf course with a group of friends is something that happens less and less these days. But I still enjoy getting out and playing golf. So I had said on Sunday evening had gone out and set a time to go and play some golf with some close friends of mine out in Langley, which for those of you that are listening, it's about a 40-minute drive from where I live. Get onto the first hole, tee off, get down to the green, which is a long, long fairway downhill. Get down to the green, and then my phone rings. It's my wife. And I realize I have her car keys in my golf bag. And she is on the road to the airport, or not on the road, but she's about to get onto the road to go and pick up her mother-in-law who's been in South Africa for the last 3 weeks. And she's got our daughter packed up with her jacket on and her backpack on, ready to go and see grandma, and she can't leave because I have her keys on. So I'm golfing with another group of business owners. We're all entrepreneurs, so we're troubleshooting. Okay, what happens here? Do we just, there's the option, do we call her an Uber? Do we Uber the keys back to her? How do we get this done? Could we, pay one of the people at the golf course to, get the keys back to her? Any of these options. And so I knew that logically a lot of this made sense, and that was where my mind went. And then I had to tap into one of the values that my wife holds. I said, you know what? She needs me, as inconvenient as it is, to pack up and wear that burden of that emotion with her, or wear that emotion with her. So I packed up, I hiked up the hill, drove 40 minutes back, dropped her keys off. She left, and then I ended up going back to the golf course and I played the back 9 holes with some friends. But it was just that understanding, and it wasn't the default practice for me. I was, immediately switched to this. All right, we got to figure this out. What's, logistically, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? We're evaluating time versus cost and everything else. And really, I knew that she just wanted me to come back and help her out with that. So I did.
Well, good on you.
That was
Good on you.
probably the right choice from the feedback loop that I got afterwards.
Well, it demonstrated your care personally because it was a sacrifice, right? So that's where there's the practical ones. Let's just send an Uber over there with the keys in it. And in this case, you were showing your personal involvement in the sacrifice, and you left your game to do it for her. So that meant something to her, right?
Yeah.
If it was two bros that were hanging out, just Uber it. I don't care. It happened.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah. Ken, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us today. Really, really incredible. Once again, for those of you, Ken has a gift, kenkeys.com/vision. It's going to share that PDF of his book with you. Really, really thoughtful. Uh, any last closing words?
Well, I mean, we cover a lot of topics. First of all, don't get overwhelmed with it, one step at a time. I've been doing this for 35 years. That's why I can kind of respond this way. So I've embedded myself for 35 years so that it becomes an instant success, right? The other one is that I said, hey, just start wherever you are at. Stop feeling guilty for where you're not. It's not going to help anything. Just wherever you're at, talk to Brandon, talk to us, get a personality assessment, start with that. Well, maybe I'll do the purpose course. Well, then maybe I'll get the wellness course. Just start somewhere. If you want to do a marathon and you've never run before, it's going to take 6 months to a year before you're even going to compete. So it doesn't matter. You start wherever you're at. It doesn't matter what your age is. I used to joke that Moses was 80 before his first real job. So if you're over 100, maybe you have an excuse. But if you're under 100, no excuse. And there was a study out said that the highest level of contribution in a person's life is between 63 and 67. Just came out.
I love
And
that.
there's ageism out there. So you've got wisdom and you still have energy, you still have intellect, and you also have maturity where you're not worried about what other people think. And the final one is not from a self-centered point of view, but from a self-honoring point of view. How how can you really lean into this authenticity that you talked about, Brandon? About what is authenticity for me? In other words, what is really, really important to me? And if I haven't done the work, then your work is to do the work. In other words, if I don't know what my purpose is to find out what my purpose is. So that's the simple one. And just take a breath. Just do one step. It took me 36 years to get here. You're not going to get there in an afternoon. It's okay. Just do one thing and then just continue to move through it. So thanks. And then, by the way, I mean, you're going to put contact information if they want to contact you because you're an associate of ours. If they want to contact me, if they want to have services or whatever, we can personally help them or one of the tools can, then for sure lean in and we're here for you. And thanks for having me on, Brandon.
Amazing. Ken, thank you so much. Your work that you have spent 35 years putting together has played an astronomical part in the success of our business. So I can't thank you enough for all of your time and dedication and for the time that you shared here with us today.
You're welcome, and thanks for the opportunity to play.
Rock and roll, Ken. We'll chat with you soon.